Today is May 9th, and today we remember the kidnapping murder of Aldo Moro, who was killed on this day in 1978. We should remember that we need to continue fighting for the values and for the vision of Aldo Moro and not forget what happened to him and what continues today in terms of deadly force being employed to thwart the humanist agenda, the pro-human agenda, the spirit of compassion as it attempts to flourish and to overcome the deadly obstacles that are presently in its path. This is from Executive Intelligence Review, 1982. This is a very interesting document that EIR published. And it's not at all surprising. I did a video about that discussed the Aldo Moro assassination, and it traced the culpability up to the British Crown, which I think shouldn't really surprise anyone, at least not among those few who will be listening to this video. And I think if that case is adequately established, I think it would be very likely that Kissinger surfaces as one of the more let's say, potent elements of this plot. So, given that we already know, we've already traced this crime up to the very top, it's not a surprise that Kissinger emerges as a person of interest. But in this document, there's plenty that helps us understand and sort of anatomize this apparatus, this network that coordinates organized crime, intelligence agencies, and all sorts of players in order to carry out these kinds of atrocities against the human race. So, given that there's a wealth of information here, and I don't want this video to go too long, I'm just making this because it is the 9th of May, and I do feel prompted to do this. So let's jump in. This is a legal brief. In a legal brief, or esposto, submitted to the Rome office of the prosecutor of the Republic on August the 14th, Fiorella Operta, chairman of the European Labour Party, POE, in Italy, documented evidence implicating Henry Kissinger in the 10 years of terrorism aimed at destroying Italy's republican institutions, and on the basis of that evidence demanded that the Italian courts subpoena the former Secretary of State to answer charges. The brief, excerpted below, details Kissinger's involvement in the kidnapping and murder of former Premier Aldo Moro and in the 1980 bombing of the Bologna train station that killed 80 people as incidents within a scheme known as, quote, the strategy of tension designed to undermine Italian democracy. The legal brief is also being submitted to the prosecutor's office in Milan and to the parliamentary commission delegated to investigate the subversive activities of the P2 Freemasonic Lodge, Propaganda 2, which has been implicated in terrorist coordination and coup plots. Fiorella Operto, Secretary General of the Partito Operaio Europeo, POE, brings to the attention of the State's Attorney of Rome certain facts and considerations regarding the investigations into the Masonic Lodge Propaganda 2 the kidnapping and assassination of the leader of the Christian democracy, Aldo Moro, and the dynamiting of the station in Bologna on August the 2nd, 1980. We also append, among other things, a brief presented by ourselves to the State's Attorney and the District Attorney of Rome relating to the investigation into the violent death of banker Roberto Calvi. On the basis of the facts we shall lay out here, we intend to demonstrate that both in regard to the kidnap and murder of Aldo Moro and for the Bologna bombing, we find ourselves confronting not isolated episodes, but a destabilization project of international significance, a project that is still going on with the aim of subverting the institutions of the Italian Republic. In particular, we single out the role at the highest levels of this project of the American citizen Henry Kissinger. The POE therefore demands that a court proceeding on the activities of Henry Kissinger be opened. The POE maintains that it is urgent to issue a subpoena for the appearance of the above-named Kissinger so that he could be called to respond on the points of crucial importance in order to ascertain the truth about the destabilization project of which our country has been the victim for many years. To motivate such a demand, the POE enumerates, number one, in the course of the investigations into the bombing of August the 2nd, 1980 in Bologna, the magistrates in charge of the investigation, Aldo Gentile, Giorgio Floridia, and Claudio Nunziata, discovered elements which proved the direct implication of the Masonic Lodge of Monte Carlo, alias Masonic Executive Committee, alias Comité Monte Carlo, in the orchestration of the bombing. Celso Elio Ciolini, an individual closely linked to the head of P2 and presented by the press as the, quote, Lieutenant of Gelli, Licio Gelli, La Repubblica, 31st of July, 1982, confessed to the Bolognese judges that the decision to set off a bomb in Bologna was taken by the Comité Monte Carlo during a meeting at the Hotel de Paris in Monaco by the Comité itself on the 11th of April, 1980. The same Licio Gelli took charge of the implementation of the criminal plan. The following May, Gelli traveled to the Hotel Sheraton of Buenos Aires, accompanied by Ciolini, who has since disappeared. There he met the noted terrorist Stefano Derecchiaie. The subject of discussion was how to set up the mechanism that will lead to the Bologna massacre. La Repubblica. Carlo has been confirmed by many witnesses heard both by the Bolognese magistrates and by the Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry into P2. Let's see, where are we here? Where are we? Yes. In particular, the Pisan entrepreneur Remo Antonucci confirmed the meeting at the Hotel de Paris, April 11th. 2. Henry Kissinger is a member of the Comité Monte Carlo. Ciolini, in fact, supplied a list of 400 names of persons belonging to the lodge. Quote, among the members are party secretaries, big industrialists, important politicians, and so forth, along with personalities of the Trilateral Commission. Ciolini mentions also Kissinger and of the Masonry. Kissinger's membership in the new Masonic Lodge organized by Gelli in Monte Carlo is, as we shall see, coherent with the activities of the ex-Secretary of State of the United States and, above all, with his relations with the P2 Lodge. According to American sources reported in press articles, it was the U.S. National Security Council, directed by Henry Kissinger, that relaunched in 1969 the activities of the P2 Lodge. On 16th of June 1981, the Rome daily Paese Sera published an article by U.S. correspondent John Capelli in which, among other things, one reads, quote, 1969 would have been the year in which, at least according to good New York sources, the decision was taken by functionaries of the U.S. National Security Council staff to protect, with a Masonic cover, the association which in substance was really to carry out a subversive shift in Italian politics. This role was then entrusted to a P2, which was already active in the field of business and investments. Number 2 man at the NSC was, it's worth recalling at that time, Alexander Haig, unquote. The number 1 man at the NSC, the man to whom Haig owed his career, was Henry Kissinger. Quote, the future Generalissimo and Secretary of State Alexander Haig launched at that time a series of contacts with Italian businessmen. It should be said that the decade from 1970 to 1980 saw in Italy the launching and unfolding of the coup maker's strategy of tension, unquote, John Capelli, article cited. Number 3, the Masonic Lodge, Comité Monte Carlo, appears to be the direct continuation of the P2 Lodge. Corrado in Veriti wrote in the weekly Panorama on the 9th of August 1982, that year, 1979, Gelli's P2 was in difficulty. The court inquests of Florence and Bologna, Italicus massacre, a train bombing, had rendered less impenetrable and more uncertain that center of business and political financial plots. Gelli decided to create a new lodge in Monte Carlo. Here, unquote, here Gelli founds the, quote, Masonic Executive Committee, persons formerly enrolled in the P2, and enrolls others who do not appear in the lists found a year and a half ago in his offices at Castiglione Fibocchi. Important names in the Italian political economic world must be kept secret. Participating in the formation of the Monte Carlo Committee were Ezio Giunciglia, the lawyer Federici, William Rosati, and Enrico Frittoli, who works in Monte Carlo for the Locadi Import-Export Company. The headquarters of this company in Rue Saint-Charles 5 becomes the mailing address of the committee. Number 4, the Comité Monte Carlo had worked out a project for the coup d'etat commonly identified by the press with the name cold coup. That is, a strategy for taking power consisting of conquering the institutions from within and attracting persons of positions of power into the lodge. The persons of the committee, reads its statute, must hold already the greatest power possible in some sector of political, economic, and cultural life. We must conquer, exercise, and increase and ever reinforce our power. Writes Corrado Incerti in the above-cited article, quote, after having embraced the idea of a military coup d'etat, the Borghese case, 12 years ago, Gelli has now developed with Monte Carlo a political project of moderate reactionary imprint, a type of cold coup based on conquering power by means of billions of dollars and on the replacement of a few politicians in the main Italian parties, unquote. To realize these plans, Gelli used terrorism, as is demonstrated by the testimony of Elio Ciolini. Gelli was and is in close contact with the top terrorists such as Stefano delle Chiaie. Against him and against some of his accomplices, the Bolognese judges issued arrest warrants on the 15th of April of this year. A judicial summons for the crime of massacre was also issued against lawyer Federico Federici, also vanished, a member of the Monte Carlo Lodge. Sandro Bonsanti wrote in La Repubblica of 31st of July 1982, quote, "The meeting takes place the 11th of April 1980 at the Hôtel du Paris of Monte Carlo. Reportedly present are Calvi, murdered in London July 17th, 1982, Gelli, Ortolani, Federici Ciolini, also disappeared, plus a bigwig from the Grand Orient, plus an industrialist. They talk about the financial problem. It is Gelli who launches the idea of covering the operation with a bombing. At the end of June, terrorist Stefano delle Chiaie sends 2 of his men to Italy to prepare for the action, which Gelli fielded and still fields all the resources to which he and his powerful patrons have access. It is appropriate to recall that various media have reported that many members of the Comité are also members of the Trilateral Commission, of which Kissinger himself is also a member, and other members of the Lodge are important Swiss, American, and English personages. Oh dear, what's this? Some problems with the typesetting, apparently. Installing a government based so let's see, things are mixed up here. I noticed that earlier, but I thought things would sort themselves out. So they're opposed. So what they don't want is what's written here. What absolutely could be the worst possible thing for them would be a government in Italy based on national unity, that is a stable government based on the alliance between the biggest Italian parties. It was against this possibility for which Aldo Moro had become the spokesman that Licio Gelli, on the one hand, and Henry Kissinger at a higher level, unleashed the means at their disposal. It is not superfluous to note, as we see this point better later, that both Gelli and Kissinger have tried with all means to impede the entry into government power of precisely those communist parties which are taking their distance from the Soviet model in the most determined way. This was a reflection, as we shall report below, that Moro made several times. It is to be noted that while Gelli said he was ready to consider the immediate possibility of a coup d'etat in the case of a clerico-communist alliance, at the same time he maintained relations with regimes in the East. In the course of a meeting of the P2's Lodge, which took place on the 5th of May, 1971 in Rome, hence a year after the decision made by Kissinger's NSC to use the P2 to cause a subversive shift in Italian politics, Gelli harangued members of the Lodge on the danger of a clerico-communist alliance, foreseeing the need to resort to any means whatever including the use of emergency plans to prevent this. As was also reported in the book by Roberto Fabiani, I Massoni in Italia, Milan, 1978, the watchword of the secret meeting centered on the point, quote, the threat of the Italian Communist Party working in accord with clericalism and determined to take power, unquote. Gelli said, among other things at this meeting, quote, and despite the fact that everybody knows this to be an immediate danger, no one has felt the need to oppose it with protests and demonstrations. Today, a state of public apathy registers in all the classes of the Italian population, passively favoring the implementation of these plans, which are projected with the most blatant premeditation to grab and retain the levers of power. Many have asked how we should act if one morning, upon getting up, we should find that the clerico-communists have taken power. If we should retreat into passive acquiescence or assume certain positions and take emergency measures based... So if we should retreat into passive acquiescence or assume certain positions and take emergency measures based on them. Sounds kind of Shakespearean. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the whips and scorns of time. What is it? Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the whips and scorns of time. What is it? Or that's not right. Or to take action against a host of, what is it? Oh my God, I can't remember. But it sounds like that. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. Thank you. All right. From this statement, so he's proposing doing the sorts of rash things that Hamlet could never bring himself to do. But we remember Laertes was the sort of perhaps more jelly-like person in that play. From the statement and from the analysis of the behavior of Gelli and his protectors, it is clear that from their point of view, the morning of the seizure of power by the clerico-communists arrived on the 16th of March, 1978, the day of the launching of the government of national unity and of the kidnapping of the author of that government, Aldo Moro. 6. In testimony given at the Moro trial and in statements to the press in the context of the trial, the widow of the statesman, Mrs. Eleonora Moro, and his children Giovanni and Agnese, said they were convinced that Aldo Moro was the victim of an international conspiracy to punish him and keep him from carrying forward his political line. The members of Moro's family said that to understand who organized the statesman's assassination, it is necessary to go back to the threats he received from an American political personality from 1975. It was in 1975 that Moro began the strategy of attention toward the Italian Communist Party, PCI, until the day he was kidnapped. From many witnesses, it emerges clearly and without any possibility of doubt that the person who threatened Moro is Henry Kissinger. Among the statements by Moro's family, other than the documentation appended, we wish to report A. In an interview given by Eleonora Moro to Corriere della Sera on the 13th of April 1982, at the beginning of the Moro trial, the following question was posed to the widow. Quote, Moro was fully conscious of the risks he was running. What were the threats, the warnings, and hence the worries of the DC leader? Where did they start? Mrs. Moro answered, quote, "At first I don't think he took it very seriously, but little by little he had to realize that it was not a generalized threat. I heard that even at the international level some people had told him point blank that if he did not quit this idea of his, if he did not stop this attempt of his of implementing his political line, that is, the idea that all the political forces should collaborate and participate directly in the life of the country, he would pay dearly for it." Mrs. Moro explained that Aldo Moro was perfectly aware of the danger of the threats he had received and equally aware that such threats could have cost him his life. Given the consciousness of the international political world that Moro had, he necessarily had to know that the source of the threats was extremely credible. Mrs. Moro continues, "I am asked if my husband had had, shall we say, friendly advice that he should desist from this thing which could be dangerous for him, or if it was said to him point blank, look, if you persist in this thing will get you into trouble. It is one of those few times in which my husband told me precisely what they had said to him without telling me the person's name. Now I shall try to repeat it as I recall it. Honorable, said in another language, you must stop pursuing your political plan of bringing all the forces of your country into direct collaboration. Either you stop this thing here, or you will pay dearly. It is up to you how you want to understand this." The sentence was like that. It's something that frightened me a great deal, unquote. B. In a deposition in court during the Moro trial, 20th of July 1982, Moro's daughter Agnese declared, quote, "My father was very shaken and worried because of the strong pressures he received to abandon his political project. I later came to know that such discussions were held with my father in the summer of 1975 when he went to the U.S. and participated in a reception at the Italian embassy," unquote. And Giovanni Moro, whose deposition was taken the same day, said, quote, "There have been reports of threats related to his political line which were received in the United States, it seems to me, at an official reception even. Somebody came up to him and advised him to switch tracks," unquote. Aldo Moro spoke again of threats he had received a few weeks before he was kidnapped. Quote, "He was aware of that fact." This is probably Giovanni continued. He was concretizing a form of government on a line he had sustained for 10 years, and he was heavily preoccupied that there might be a lot of forces converging abroad so that the constitution of this government would never arrive. The Constitution would never arrive. Oh dear, this text is a mess. Yes, so basically, the international criminal syndicate doesn't like strong nations as a rule. So any form of nationalism or any form of internal solidarity of a formidable nation would be opposed to using extreme measures by this let's call it a cabal. C. In September 1978, Honorable Vittorio Cervone, a Christian Democrat who was very close to Moro, L'Avvenire, this is from also L'Avvenire of 16th of April 1982, Honorable Vittorio Cervone, Christian Democrat very close to Moro, reported to an Italian weekly what the statesman had said to him before his kidnapping. He told me, "You will see that they will make us pay for our political line. It happens to me as it does to Berlinguer. He does not find comprehension in the Soviet Union, and I in the United States, and in part of Germany. By that he meant Strauss. Now we've arrived at this conclusion: the Red Brigades, editor, kidnap and the murder. Oh boy. Yes. The Red Brigades. You can kind of put this together, I'm sure. I don't know how they allowed this document to be published in such a slipshod way. And I should have read through it carefully and sorted it out, but I was just, it's late in the day. I really wanted to get this done. I really wanted to observe this terrible tragedy on this anniversary, 45th anniversary, so apologies. 7. The threats against Moro were proffered by Henry Kissinger. Such threats fit into the picture of a precise strategy. The testimonies and statements in this sense have been numerous, and many others can be obtained by Italian justice using the approach followed by Moro's family. In an interview released to the daily paper La Repubblica, 17th of August, 1978, Senator Luigi Granelli, who was at the time head of the Foreign Affairs section of the Christian Democracy, referred to the kidnapping of the statesman, and responding to a question on the threats Moro had received from the Americans, stated, quote, "The Americans? The term is too generic." This part is very important. Really, please heed this next passage. It is known there was not much understanding from Kissinger, and that's not surprising. I recall an unpleasant toast by Kissinger in Rome at the end of a dinner and a very long official discussion with Moro. "We have spoken at length of the Italian situation," said Kissinger, "and up to 1947 I understand everything very well, but then after that I don't understand anything." Moro was very angry. In the same interview, Senator Granelli explains, I love this, that the Americans, the term is too generic. Yes, he's talking about a very specific network within what is technically America, but it doesn't correspond to America, the country, at all. In the same interview, Senator Granelli explains why he was convinced that Moro had been kidnapped and killed precisely to keep him from carrying forward his political line. And he also explains why the threats against the statesman are to be linked directly to his kidnapping. Quote, "From the beginning, we were convinced that we had to face not only a human situation, however dramatic, but a political situation. The Moro crime cannot be isolated from the overall strategy of tension. Surely, from Piazza Fontana, December 1969, bombing in Milan that claimed 16 lives and was the first major terrorist act since the war," editor. The strategy appears diverse, but how can one rule out a linkage, a single design? It is also true that these episodes did not achieve their objective. So they just keep whacking away at it, right? Quote, "From the political standpoint, we had continued to press forward, so they hit the author of this pressing forward." That was not the first time that Moro had felt himself in danger. Certainly he underwent pressures and threats in the period when he preceded and accompanied the opening of the left, the first inclusion of Socialist Party in government, 1962 to 63, under Moro's premiership. True that in those years many politicians were forced to sleep away from their homes from time to time, but it was Moro himself who taught us then that the only positive response to the destabilization attempts was to be sought and found in a broadening of the consensus. Surely pressure was put on him to abandon his policy. Oh, God. This is from an interview that Granelli made, the above-cited reference to Henry Kissinger. More apologies. This is a mess. B. Parliamentarian Stefano Rodotà, in an article which appeared in Panorama on the 2nd of August, 1982, writing under the headline, "So Many Great Old Men," specifically fingers Henry Kissinger as the one who symbolizes at least one of the circles that had planned the violent interruption of Moro's policy, and, as the text evinces, as the possible giver of the order to kidnap and assassinate Aldo Moro. Rodotà writes, "From Henry Kissinger to Raffaele Cutolo, are these by now the extremes of the parabola traced by the Red Brigades, from the assassination of Aldo Moro to that of the head of Digos in Naples? The question is not merely rhetorical, but it focuses the hot issue which can no longer be evaded, since in recent days two extreme significant events have occurred. First, in depositions before the Roman court, Moro's family once again emphatically underlined an element upon which they had insisted in the past. Nora, Agnese, Giovanni, Moro, during his trip to the United States, that was previously referred to, the event at the embassy, and I think actually within a hotel, in a private hotel room, heavy and explicit threats were made by Henry Kissinger to Aldo Moro. In substance, the Christian Democratic political leader was invited to abandon his policy of cautious opening toward the PCI, or else face grave consequences, including personal ones. And in the same hearing as Mrs. Moro's deposition, one of the accused Red Brigaders, Antonio Marini, revealed that during his interrogation by part of the BR, the Red Brigades, Moro had indicated 3 occasions on which he had been threatened. The Red Brigadiers, the last of these linked, in fact, to the phase of political conflicts with Kissinger. This name, therefore, symbolizes at least one of those circles which, according to the family's hypothesis, had planned a violent interruption of Aldo Moro's policy, unquote. The Honorable Rodotà concludes by establishing a link between what he had written regarding the role played by Henry Kissinger in the kidnap and the role played in the context of the plot against Moro by the P2 Lodge. Quote, "This means that the plot was not merely international. The political assassination of Moro becomes, in this light, the first move of that game plan among secret powers that later unfolded through affairs like the P2 affair and the Banco Ambrosiano affair." Maybe that's the murder of Calvi and the P2, when the P2 fell apart or was exposed in 1981, I think. It is a game plan in full operation, and one upon which, more than upon any other, the destiny of democracy in Italy depends, unquote. C. Ambassador Roberto Ducci, former head of the political affairs section of the Italian Foreign Ministry, in his book I Capi in Testa, reports episodes which are extremely significant for understanding the campaign of threats unleashed by Kissinger against Moro. Ambassador Roberto Ducci is a source of crucial importance, given the fact that he personally participated in most of the discussions between Kissinger and Moro. On page 73 of the book, the ambassador reports on a discussion between Kissinger and Moro at the end of which Kissinger threatened almost explicitly a coup d'etat in Italy. Quote, Moro invited Kissinger to lunch at Villa Madama, Foreign Ministry in Rome. Kissinger got up and said, quote, as I sat down, I asked my friend Moro to explain the Italian political situation to me, and he did. But when he got up, he had only gotten as far as 1947, and therefore I must postpone the continuation of my education on this subject until a future meeting. In the meantime, I cannot be concerned about the Italian internal situation as I understand it and as my advisors present it to me. It is a situation that no one, I believe, could describe with optimism and which seems to me to have worsened notably since my last visit. I am sure that Signor Moro and other Italian ministers are as worried about it as I, and I don't doubt that they will want to commit themselves totally to improve things. Otherwise, the day will have to come in which I shall be obliged to call in Ambassador Volpi, John Volpi, then U.S. Ambassador to Rome, and tell him, Dear Volpi, has the time come to send a general in place of you? I don't believe so. End of quote of the Kissinger quote. Every one of us remained frozen, unquote. In other parts of his book, Ambassador Ducci describes another meeting between Kissinger and Moro in the United States. Quote, Kissinger allowed Moro to come to the 24th floor of the Hotel Hilton to have breakfast with him at 8 in the morning. Sonnenfeld met him at the door. At a certain point, in walked Kissinger and said hello while continuing to stir a soft-boiled egg he had in a cup. He quickly interrupted Moro's first words, and he threw himself into a merry-go-round of jokes, barbs, condescending remarks, threats, and compliments, all equally directed at Moro and at some of his advisers. After these brief and sudden words, Kissinger, at a certain point, disappeared from the room and did not come back. Moro felt the affront was personally against him. D. The journalist Rodolfo Brancoli, in his book Spettatori Interessanti, reports part of the confessions extorted by the Red Brigades from Moro during his imprisonment, from which there emerge certain details which are crucial for understanding Kissinger's particular hatred for Moro. Quote, Moro speaks several times in his confessions of Kissinger's hostility to him when he recalls his having been excluded from receptions at the embassy by directive of the then Secretary of State, and the preference shown with extreme simplicity and a certain dose of rudeness for the D.C., Christian Democracy younger set, which would set aside, quote, the more traditional and unsophisticated group to which I belonged. Moro himself mentioned a more specific recent motive for contrasts with Kissinger, conflicts with Kissinger in his confessions, where he brings up the question of landing bases on Italian soil for American resupply to Israel during the Yom Kippur 1973 war. Moro says, quote, we, although risking friction with our powerful ally, explain that, above all, given the lack of forewarning and inadequate explanation of the reasons and purposes that could be considered a NATO crisis, we therefore refused the bases that were requested. The new pro-Arab, or at least a more balanced orientation of Europe and Italy, continued to be badly digested by the Americans, who continue to interfere in the existence, the modalities, the limits, and the presuppositions of the Euro-Arab dialogue, with the effect of somewhat slowing down the pace of the operation and partially emptying it of its content. This was in large part the position of Kissinger, who, besides, made no mystery of it, had cultivated an animosity for the Italian position and for me personally. As it was explained to me by objective sources, and as some very unpleasant episodes showed to be true, I was portrayed as bent on an indiscriminate accord with the Italian Communist Party, whereas it is well known that my attitude is a carefully thought out and measured political evaluation. 8. In a book published by the Partito Operaio Europeo in October 1978, which we attached to this brief, Who Killed Aldo Moro?, the POE detailed both certain previously unpublished facts and the strategic context in which the kidnap of Aldo Moro was situated. In particular, the book referred to an operation for which Kissinger was one of the main movers, known as the, quote, 90 days strategy of that year, with various destabilization maneuvers against Italy, which led to the kidnap and killing of Aldo Moro. Number 9, we maintain that it is of crucial importance for the purposes of the investigation of the activities of Henry Kissinger in relation to the Moro crime to underline that Kissinger and his strategy must not be identified, this is what is really important, must not be identified with the United States government or with the United States. Kissinger represents an international force, a private network. He works for the Queen's Privy Council. From the appended material, I threw that in. If you're just listening and not reading along about the Queen's Privy Council, that was me. From the appended material, it will become clear that Kissinger declared explicitly that he has followed from the outset a foreign policy aimed at bringing about the triumph of the strategic interests of British power groups. Number 10. Kissinger is well known in international political circles for his capacity to put the threats he proffers into action. This is proven by the case of the president of Pakistan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, a political leader dedicated to the development of his country, whose government was overturned by a coup d'etat on July 4th, 1977, who was imprisoned and then killed. As the white paper written by Bhutto himself at the beginning of 1977 reports, see appended the Pakistan Papers Executive Intelligence Review, January 1979, in a statement that is on the court record of the Supreme Court of Pakistan, Bhutto was perfectly aware, even before the coup against him, that Kissinger had signed a death sentence against his person, quote unquote, had, it's all broken up, not wanted to accede to threats and pressures on him by Kissinger himself. Dr. Kissinger, Bhutto wrote, told me that I should not insult the intelligence of the United States by saying that Pakistan needs uranium processing plants to satisfy its energy needs. I replied that I do not intend to insult the intelligence of the United States by discussing the energy needs of Pakistan, but at the same time, he should not insult the sovereignty and self-respect of Pakistan by discussing the plant in any way. Thus, I received my death sentence. Well, Kissinger's mission is to destroy notions of sovereignty wherever they crop up anywhere in the world. So you can tell them to back down, and you can have the greatest of motives behind, and all the principles of international law and human decency behind you. It absolutely does absolutely no good. We further maintain that it is crucially important to obtain material on the assassination of the Spanish Prime Minister Carrero Blanco, of the coup d'etat against and murder of President of Chile, Salvador Allende, and the murder of the Saudi monarch, King Faisal. In particular, regarding the assassination of Carrero Blanco, it is important to note that he, like Moro, had opposed the concession of military bases repeatedly demanded by Kissinger in relation to the Arab-Israeli War in October of 1973. Moro held talks on this point in Madrid, December 18th, 19th, and found himself faced with a firm reaction by Carrero Blanco. On the 20th of December, Carrero Blanco was assassinated. In the context of our request for urgent investigations into Henry Kissinger, we also maintain that it is urgent to open investigations into one of the men who is most linked to Kissinger and whose interface with the P2 Lodge has been spoken of several times by the press. In particular, we maintain that the investigative dossier must include the Alexander Haig file seized among the papers of Licio Gelli in his villa at Castiglione Fibocci, of which Paese Sera, among other things, spoke in its June 7th, 1981 issue in an article titled, "In Gelli's Safe, there was also a file on Haig, and signed by Sergio Baraldi." The article reads in part, quote, "Rumors are circulating in Rome that the Milanese judges have sent the document to Palazzo Chigi. Therefore, this is of extraordinary significance, above all in relation to what we have reported in point 2 of this brief. We also maintain it urgent to open immediate probes into a series of threats launched in the direction of Mrs. Moro after her deposition. In particular, the journalist Indro Montanelli wrote in the weekly Oggi an article asking that Mrs. Moro be incriminated and in concluding, quote, "All of this reinforces in me my old idea that public officials should take their widows to their graves with them. Widows are very dangerous." Unquote. Montanelli, who is linked to TV Monte Carlo, is famous for the series of threatening articles he wrote against the then president of ENI, Italy's national hydrocarbons agency, which pursued a policy of independence from the oil multinationals. Who was it who died in an air accident, which many considered sabotage? This is just absolutely a mess. We'll figure it out. Considerations. We realize the difficulties of pursuing an investigation of this kind, but besides the duty of doing justice to Aldo Moro, the necessity of the investigation of Henry Kissinger beginning with the presentation of a warrant for his appearance to Kissinger himself is imposed by the fact that, as many political figures have stressed, the peril of destabilization of which Moro was the victim is still very much alive and operational. Therefore, the Italian Republican state must be made capable of safeguarding its institutions. Respectfully submitted, Fiorella Operto. As we see, yes, it's still, today, 2023, 45 years later, very much alive and operational. Let's see. We might as well, no, I'm almost out of time. 2 key witnesses have disappeared. Not surprising. I think I've gone over a couple of these in a previous video. So again, I just keep reaffirming in these videos how much I learn about the present situation by going back 30, 40, 50 years into the past. I find it very instructive. So at any rate, here let's just in our hearts pay homage to Aldo Moro and his courage and his vision, and let's let's be conscious of the situation. Let's have some situational awareness